Good afternoon, this is Maryann Morris, the Executive Director of the Collaborative, and we're here for another episode of Prevention Works. The Collaborative is an alcohol, drug, and tobacco prevention organization here in the North Shire and on the mountain community. And today's Prevention Works topic is about smoke-free zones. And we have some really great special guests today. One is Cathy O'Reilly, who is the Chronic Disease Prevention Specialist for the Bennington area, Vermont Department of Health, and she's also the school liaison for the Bennington area Department of Health. Victoria Silsbee is our tobacco specialist at the Collaborative and our community outreach person. And Rob Giotti is the town manager for Dorset. And Dorset town properties went smoke-free in 2011, or had smoke-free zone policies added in 2011. So we're really interested to hear how that went for you, Rob, too. So I wanted to start out asking Cathy about some statistics for Vermont. Can you talk about tobacco usage in Vermont?
Sure. Currently, about 18% of all adults in the state of Vermont smoke. That's for the whole 18%. State, okay? In Bennington, if you look at statistics for our own district office, which includes the North Shire and the South Shire, so all of Bennington County, in 2011 and 2012, the Behavior Risk Factor Surveillance System, which is a survey we do, indicated that 27% of adults in Bennington County were currently smoking. Now, wow. Those statistics are a little dated, but I think it's safe to say that our percentages have run historically higher than the state percentage. Wow. So that's one reason we want to think about smoking. Sure. About 95,000 Vermonters smoke total smoke cigarettes, and 800 of those will die of tobacco-related illnesses per year. In addition, a big initiative was unrolled by the Department of Health in October surrounding tobacco marketing to youth. And in preparation for that campaign called Counterbalance, right. We released some statistics, and it is true that over 400 Vermont youth become daily smokers every year. And in the United States, more than 3,000 youth light their cigarette for the first time every day. So it's youth under the age of 18. Right. So they're pretty compelling statistics.
Yeah, really compelling statistics, particularly for Bennington County. I'm really surprised by that. So I know that the Collaborative has worked with policy around smoke-free zones and promotion of educational materials about smoke-free zones for the last several years, but the Vermont Department of Health is making a big push. You talked about with Counterbalance. Are there other initiatives with the Vermont Department of Health?
Well, we have a number of things going on. Of course, there's legislation passed by the state of Vermont, which we'll talk about, I guess, a little later in the program. But one of our biggest things is we have a quit assistance website, which is known now as 802 Quits.
802 Quits, right.
802 Quits. And on that website, there are all sorts of resources to help a person quit smoking. Sure. You can quit using just the website, an individual quit. We have quit partners located geographically all over the state so that you can go to classes and quit with other people. Some people need that. Yeah. We have all sorts of resources. Nicotine gum is available for no charge. If you visit that website, 802 Quits, you can see a lot of things there. Right. In addition, the Department of Health has a tool that employers can use to help their work sites become either smoke-free and to help their employees in preparation for something like that, right, to quit smoking.
Oh, that's a great combination.
Quit at Work.
Okay. And so that's on the Vermont Department of Health website?
Yes, it is. Okay. You can download it.
Mm-hmm. That's really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And this is what it looks like, actually.
Oh, great.
Okay. Quit at Work.
Fabulous.
It's a step by step. It tells you everything that you need to do. It has dates, the whole 9 yards.
Great. We'll try to get all those links up at the end of the program, too. I think that that's wonderful. One of the reasons that the collaborative works around policies for smoke-free zones and encourages things like that is because in our mission and in our vision, we have a vision for a healthy community. And I wonder if each of you guys can just talk about how tobacco use policy helps to create healthier communities. I don't know. Who wants to start?
Well, sure. I think it's pretty obvious. Cigarette smoking is probably just about one of the only things that is directly linked to cancer. So we all know it is the direct cause of lung cancer. So that in and of itself is obviously a real incentive to promote smoke-free. In addition, we know how smoking affects, we all talk about how smoking affects the individual smoker. Obviously, we know that through the American Cancer Society. We know all of this. We have all the statistics. That is why all the legislation has been passed over the past 50 years to decrease, the presence of cigarettes within the greater culture and things like that. Right. But what we haven't talked about, and only probably in the past 10, 20 years maybe, we've really started talking about the effects of secondhand smoke and now third-hand smoke on the people that surround the individual that is smoking. Oh, wow. And the secondhand smoke, there's pretty compelling evidence that secondhand smoke, contributes to cancer, but in particular, especially with little kids, it can exacerbate already existing respiratory conditions such as asthma. And in the state of Vermont, we have a very, very, very big problem with asthma. Our statistics are higher than a lot of the country. So obviously, smoke
that seems so counterintuitive to Vermont as a state because we're such a big outdoors and active kind of a place.
But we do have a lot of children and a lot of adults who suffer from asthma. As a matter of fact, in Bennington County, the statistics are pretty compelling.
Wow.
So, and secondhand smoke, we absolutely know that will exacerbate that condition.
Right.
That is why just last year in 2014, the legislature passed the law that states that you cannot smoke in a car with a child 8 years old or under.
That's really great. That's a really great law. And I know that we've done a little bit to promote that, but I think that that's one of those newer laws that needs as much attention as possible because people get into the habit and they forget that those new laws come across. So 8 years or younger. So that is, what, second grade? Yep.
We're also finding out, there's research coming out now about third-hand smoke. We know about second-hand smoke. It's the smoke that if you walk into an area and you walk 50 feet away from the building and you see people congregated smoking, you can see the second-hand smoke. But now people are talking about third-hand smoke, and third-hand smoke is the nicotine and tar and things like that that is a byproduct that comes in the cigarette smoke that gets into walls, flooring, draperies, carpeting. And research is showing now that those gases can become trapped in those substances and release that toxic substances for years and years and years after that apartment has been vacated by the smoker.
Wow, so we're really at risk for a much longer time than just walking through the cloud of smoke.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I ask you guys some your ideas about why tobacco-free zones and tobacco policies contribute towards a healthy community?
Sure.
Go for it, Rob.
Jump on it? Sure. I guess to get back a little bit on the piece of legislation that was passed, I think last year, I think Patty Comline, one of our local state representatives, was a co-sponsor on that, and I think it was definitely a step in the right direction, given all the statistics that we now know are issues. So for Dorset, I think it's about kind of leading by example, and it's about creating an atmosphere or an environment in your public spaces that promote healthy interactions between members of the community. There's a lot that goes into public policies in terms of municipally being created and adopted and then enforced. So typically, when it goes through that process, there's a lot of vetting that's required.
Yeah.
But this was one where there seemed to be a lot of equal thinking in terms of the board members. I think the assistance from the collaborative in coming up with draft policies and stuff like that. I think it was, so for us, it was really about promoting healthy public spaces and having a chance to really lead by example as a town.
Yeah, well, I think that that's a really good point of leading by example, and it's great that you had such support from the select board, because people do have these conceptions about how hard it's going to be. So it's going to be great to hear a little bit more about that experience for you. Victoria, do you want to talk any more about?
Sure, just very quickly, it's all about positive role modeling for me. So if the community or the business has a smoke or tobacco-free policy, then that's a great example for the community members, our visitors, and our children and our youth.
Yeah.
Especially for our youth, because the less they see of that behavior of the tobacco use, the less likely they are to use it.
Yeah. So, like I said, I think that there's a conception that there's going to be a lot of pushback about creating tobacco policy, and I wanted to ask you, Rob, about how can these adoptions of policies be beneficial for towns, or what have you seen that's been of a benefit for Dorset?
I think it's for Dorset, and the way that we've gone through this process is this is kind of the baseline is having a policy that kind of outlines the effort that you want to get into. Typically with municipalities, usually a lot of mechanisms are set up in ordinances that carry civil fine weight and stuff like that, and that usually when you start to go down that that road, it does require a little additional vetting and some serious discussion, because you're now talking about civil fines. But I think for us, having a policy was important because it really empowers not only our employees, staff members, certainly volunteers that work with the town, but also residents to kind of help with the policing of the public spaces, and it gives them the ability to really kind of have a foundation to stand on if they're going to see a potential violation of the policy, and then ask for somebody to to stop the violation.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's a key component of this, is by having the policy, having the signs at the public spaces, it allows those who are kind of tasked with the enforcement of it to feel empowered enough to speak up, because they know that there is this policy, the select board, the town is behind them in the effort.
Right. And have you seen that? Have you seen examples of?
Yeah, I have in public spaces. I actually have. I've seen it on the Dorset Green
Right.
a couple of times, and typically in and around the town office. I think that's. I think public buildings, I think, are, at least in my experience, are less apt to see the use, because there's there has been a historic departure from smoking in and around public buildings. So that hasn't been as much of an issue, but it does, again, it does give us the platform to use.
Sure. And did you, after the policies were in place and rolled out, did you hear any backlash from it?
We anticipated some pushback. I think with anything that you do in the public realm, you're basically, with this type of an endeavor, to potentially restrict the activities of certain individuals, certain residents. It could be viewed as unpopular, because it's essentially the public spaces belong to everybody, and that that includes the folks that smoke and the folks that don't.
Right.
But I think when you get into the statistics, if the vast majority of residents don't smoke, then you do have to, as town officials, you've got to look at what the larger public good is.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And so, 4 years later, are you hearing anything more about it, or is it's just sort of as it always was?
Yeah, I think it is kind of status quo. Again, there really I can't think of a negative experience where somebody was really put off or felt like their rights had been curbed. Now, I don't know if that's because we're it's not typical, or maybe other towns would have different situations. We're a little bit more of a rural town, but certainly I think I know that the select board felt supported by the residents that kind of sat through the public hearing process.
Yeah. And so if, maybe I'll ask Victoria first, can you talk about what considerations go into implementing and adopting tobacco policies?
Sure. So when I've met with some of the area businesses, like the town of Dorset, I think some of the considerations you have to decide, first off, is it going to be a tobacco-free policy, or is it going to be a smoke-free policy?
Okay, and tell us what that difference is.
So a tobacco-free policy is inclusive of all tobacco products and tobacco substitutes.
Mm-hmm.
So that would include e-cigarettes, chew, things like that, cigars, traditional cigarettes.
Right.
Smoke-free is any product that would produce a smoke.
Okay.
So not your tobacco substitutes, maybe not your electronic or vaping cigarettes.
That's still to be determined.
Right.
Right.
So definitely what kind of a policy,
Mm-hmm.
and I think timing is a big consideration for entities to consider.
Okay.
So it's not something that you want to think like, oh, next week we're going tobacco or smoke-free. It's let's do this with lots of time so that we can go through the vetting process, we can make sure that we've got some buy-in from the employees, because it's very important that you might even want to consider getting some employees together and having a committee so that everyone can be a part of the process.
Yeah, make it a very conscious thing.
And it, you know, it might take 6 months, it might take 3 months, and it might take a year.
Right.
But it's as long as you've got that buy-in and you've got a committee working towards that common goal, then usually it's a welcomed opportunity. And businesses, I think, Rob and maybe Cathy, you can also speak to this, but I think people that do adopt these kind of policies, my experience and my feedback is that they find that they reduce their employee usage of tobacco. So it usually is a motivator for employees to quit.
Right. And so speaking of, things to consider when coming through a policy is something like the 802 quits
That's
piece, something that
big part of the packet and the process,
Right.
is to make sure you've got, we're fortunate with a Vermont Quit partner. We can arrange to have a Quit partner come on site to lead tobacco cessation classes to support employees and even employee families that may want to go through the process and decision of quitting.
Right. So you're speaking about resources there for places that are coming to that decision. And I know that, Cathy, you'd mentioned the resource from the Vermont Department of Health. Are there other resources for towns or businesses or events that are going to make the move for smoke-free?
So there's signage. I think we brought, there's this big banner right here.
Right.
I think by one of our chairs, there's a little sign that talks about, the event or the space being tobacco-free. So in addition to rolling out a policy or implementing that, you're also going to want to have some kind of signage to support your policy so that there's awareness. It brings awareness.
Yeah, and that was clear in what Rob was saying about that it empowers people to help enforce, which is great. So we talked a little bit about the laws. You talked about the new law. Are there other important laws for Vermont around tobacco and use, tobacco use?
Well, we all know that in 1993, Vermont passed the Clean Indoor Air Act, which
Right.
said that all enclosed indoor, public places needed to be smoke-free, and that included restaurants. In 2005, the law was amended to include bars and clubs.
Okay.
And then in 2009, Vermont amended its smoking in the workplace law to prohibit smoking in all areas of the workplace. Before that, they were designated smoking areas, but 2009 said that's gone. All indoor places in the workplace need to be smoke-free.
Right. And now it's sort of, it sounds like it's kind of up to those businesses and towns and events now that we've pushed people out of the buildings, to take it upon themselves to create those smoke-free areas outside, which is what these tools are for.
Right, because there is no legislation that states anything about outside the building.
Right.
For instance, we have a policy at the state office at the Vermont Department of Health building in Bennington, no smoking within 50 feet of the entrance.
Right.
And we've had, we share the space with CCV.
Yeah.
And so there are generally a lot
So
of
that's a
students
tough one,
who
too.
go out and they'll smoke. But I have
Right.
to tell you
Yeah.
that if you walk up to people and you explain to the policy and why it's present, most people are very, very, very cognizant of the fact that a lot of times there are little kids coming through, and they
Right.
are more than happy to step back.
Right. Well, that's really good news to hear too, because I think when you talk about that, it gives people empowers them to be able to do the self-enforcement. People might be a little bit scared to step up because of the reaction, but that's good to hear. Are there any? What else about enforcement? Is there anything else that the Department of Health can add about how to enforce?
Well, I mean, in terms of enforcing smoke-free zones.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that there's anywhere that says there are going to be the cigarette or the tobacco police.
Yeah.
And it really, honestly, once you have that law on the books in terms of a municipality or something like that, most people, I mean, you may have to remind people, you may have to ask people to put their cigarette out, but, and most people will do it, okay? And it really is not a problem.
Yeah.
In terms of the law that was passed last year in 2014 to state that nobody should be smoking in a car with a child that is 8 years old or under, that is considered a first offense. So for instance, if somebody's driving along and a police officer sees them with a child smoking in the car, they don't have to have another reason to pull them over. They can just pull them over.
Oh,
it's
wow.
a first offense.
Wow. So that's a very stringent law then for that. That's really great.
With last year was a big year for tobacco policy on the state level. They also amended the Act 135, which Cathy has been speaking about, also amended the tobacco use policy on school property. So it incorporates now tobacco substitutes, which means electronic cigarettes. Are forbidden on, the use of electronic cigarettes are forbidden on all public school property and grounds. But what's interesting also, it's not just on school grounds, it's also on school-sponsored functions, maybe off campus.
Oh. So the cross-country track race or the football game.
Or if you're going to a theater
Okay.
and it's a school event, then you're not meant to be smoking at that school function.
Right, and okay, so that's great. And I think
And it also means children, it's regardless of whether school's in session
right.
or kids are present. So that's a very thorough consideration
Absolutely.
that they gave that policy.
Yeah, I'm thinking about all the times that the playgrounds get used on the weekends and
That's
things
right.
like that, and maybe we need to talk to schools or show this to schools to bump up their advertisement of their smoke-free areas. Well, that's about it for us for Prevention Works today, but I'm really grateful for this conversation to hear the insights from Rob Giotti from Dorset about how the town made their property smoke-free, and then the expertise of Victoria from the collaborative and the smoking cessation, the smoke-free zone materials, and the expertise from Cathy about what the usage rates are. I think that I want to end with saying again, it's important for Bennington County because, as Cathy said, it's 18% for the country, I believe you said?
For the state.
For the
Vermont.
state, and in Bennington County, 27% the usage rate for tobacco. So we have some work to do, and I thank you guys for being with us here today.
Having us.
I thank you all for tuning in for Prevention Works and the Collaborative. Have a great day.